The warmth of the hearth scent of the car was a familiar blend of Ellie's sandalwood air freshener and the faint, clean smell of the leather seats. It was their bubble, their moving sanctuary. And usually, Clara Mae Thompson felt nothing but peace within it. But today, a low thrum of anxiety pulsed beneath her ribs, a nervous counter-rhythm to the smooth soul music crooning from the speakers. "You're thinking so loud I can't hear the music," Eli murmured, his eyes crinkling at the corners. As he glanced at her from the driver's seat, his hand, warm and steady, left the wheel to cover hers where it rested on the center console. "She's going to love you. She's going to scrutinize me under a microscope powerful enough to see my soul," Clara corrected, though a smile touched her lips. "And she'll probably find it lacking in seasoning." Eli chuckled, a deep, comforting sound. "My mom's not that bad. She's just a mom. Her job is to make sure I didn't fall for some monster who's going to break my heart. And I have to prove I'm not a monster. You just have to be you," he said, giving her hand a final squeeze before returning his to the wheel. But as he looked back at the road, Clara saw a flicker of something in his otherwise calm expression. It wasn't worry, not exactly. It was a quiet preparedness. The look of a man who had navigated these specific waters before and knew the currents that pulled up to a modest but immaculate brick house, the kind of home that had seen decades of life. The garden was a riot of color, and a wreath on the door seemed to welcome them personally. The moment they stepped out of the car, the front door opened, and Lena Vance stood there, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a handsome woman, with Ellie's kind eyes but a posture that was all no-nonsense strength. "You're late," she said, but she was already smiling, pulling Eli into a fierce hug. "Dinner's not getting any younger." Her eyes landed on Clara and the smile softened, becoming polite, but observant. "And you must be Clara Mae. It's good to finally put a face to the name." The inside of the house was just as Clara imagined, filled with the rich, complex aroma of roasting meat and spices. The walls adorned with family photos that chronicled generations. It was a living, breathing history, and Clara felt its weight as she stepped over the threshold. Dinner was a masterclass in subtle interrogation. As they passed bowls of collard greens, mac and cheese so dense it could be cut with a knife, and candied yams that melted on the tongue, Lena's questions came like gentle probes. "Clara Mae, Eli tells me you're a graphic designer. That's wonderful. What do your parents do?" Lena asked, her fork poised. "My father is in business. And my mom? Well, my mom mostly manages my father," Clara said with a small, self-deprecating laugh. "A businessman." "What kind of business?" "He's in finance. Investment banking," Clara replied, suddenly feeling how sterile and foreign that sounded in this warm, fragrant kitchen. "I see," Lena said, her expression unreadable. "And where did you grow up?" Eli mentioned a suburb. "Was it Northwood?" "Yes, that's right." Lena took a slow sip of her sweet tea. "Don't know that I've ever had a reason to go out there." "Did you know many black families in your town?" The question hung in the air, direct and unavoidable. Eli tensed slightly beside her. Clara felt a flush creep up her neck. This was the test. She could lie, or she could be honest. "No, ma'am," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I didn't. The world I grew up in was very small." After dinner, as Clara helped clear the dishes, Lena motioned her into the living room. She pulled a heavy, leather-bound photo album from a bookshelf. "Come, sit with me a moment." She opened it to a picture of a small, bright-eyed Eli with a gash on his knee, trying hard not to cry. "He was 7 here," Lena said, her voice softer now. "First kid from our neighborhood to get into that magnet program downtown. On his second day, some boys pushed him on the playground, told him to go back where he came from. He never told his teachers, just came home with a bloody knee and a quiet look in his eyes." Lena looked up from the photo, her gaze meeting Clara's directly. It was a warning, a history lesson, and a question all in one. "You understand the world my son lives in? Are you strong enough for it?" Clara's heart ached. The image of that small boy trying to be brave searing itself into her mind. She didn't offer empty platitudes or claim to understand. Instead, she met the older woman's gaze and spoke from the heart. "Thank you for trusting me with that, Lena," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I can't promise to always know what to do or what to say, but I can promise you this. I want to build a world with him where he feels safe. I will spend my life trying to be his sanctuary." A long moment passed. The ticking of a grandfather clock filled the silence. Then, Lena Vance's stern expression finally, completely melted. She reached out and patted Clara's hand. "That's all a mother can ask for," she whispered. On the drive home, the car was once again a sanctuary, but a different kind. The The bubble felt stronger, fortified. She was testing me, Clara said. Not as a question, but as a statement. She had to, Eli replied, his voice full of love for both of them. Her whole life has been about protecting me. She needed to know you were on her side. Clara leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, watching the city lights blur past. She had passed the first test, but she knew, with a certainty, that chilled her despite the warmth of the car's heater, that it was only the beginning. The world's cold stare weeks following the dinner with Lena were a blissful return to their bubble. They explored their city, worked on their respective projects, and fell more deeply in love. But a bubble, by its nature, is fragile. All it takes is a single sharp edge from the outside world to tear it open for Clara. The tearing came not as one big rip, but as a series of 1,000 tiny, paper cuts. The first cut happened on a Tuesday. Eli needed a new suit for a formal awards ceremony his architectural firm was holding. They went to a high-end department store downtown, the kind with plush carpets that muffled your footsteps and lighting that made everything look expensive. As they browsed the racks, Clara noticed him first, a security guard, tall and broad, with a telltale earpiece. He wasn't looking at anyone else. His focus was a laser beam on Eli. When they moved from suits to shirts, he moved. When they stopped to look at ties, he was there, pretending to examine a display of cufflinks 10 feet away. That man is following us, Clara whispered, a hot flare of indignation in her chest. Eli didn't even look. He simply ran a hand over his silk tie, his jaw tight. I know, he said, his voice flat. Just ignore him. Pick a tie. His resignation was more infuriating than the guard's suspicion. We should say something. To who? Clara, too. The manager who hired him to do exactly what he's doing, he said, his voice low and strained. Let's just get the suit and go. She saw the exhaustion in his posture and let it drop. But the injustice sat like a stone in her stomach. The second cut came a week later. They were getting serious about their future and had started looking at houses online. They found a beautiful little craftsman bungalow in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, a place they could both see themselves growing old in. Clara, excited, called the real estate agent listed. The woman, Diane, was bubbly and effusive on the phone. It's a fantastic property. You sound so lovely. When can you come see it? They scheduled a viewing for that Saturday. When they pulled up, Diane was waiting on the porch, a wide smile on her face. The smile faltered for a microsecond when she saw Eli get out of the passenger side. But she recovered quickly. Too quickly. Welcome, she chirped. Then she proceeded to conduct the entire tour, speaking almost exclusively to Clara. Now, Clara. The kitchen has brand new quartz countertops, Clara. You'll find the mortgage on a place like this is quite manageable. Clara, the master. Bedroom gets wonderful morning light. Eli, an architect, asked a technical question about the foundation. Diane blinked, then looked to Clara. Well, I have the inspection report here if you'd like to see it. In the car afterward, Clara exploded. She thought you were I don't know what. She thought I was the one buying the house. Did you see how she dismissed your question? You're an architect, for God's sake. Eli just stared out the window. I saw, he said quietly. Let's just take it off the list. The third cut was the simplest and in some ways the cruelest. It was a perfect autumn afternoon. The air was crisp, and the leaves in the park were a symphony of red and gold. They bought hot chocolates and sat on a park bench, his arm around her head on his shoulder. They were just a couple in love, in a park, on a Sunday, and then an older white couple walked by. The woman, her hair a perfect silver coif, Eli let out a long, it wasn't a glance. It was a sound Clara was beginning to disapproving gawk. It wasn't a sigh of anger or frustration. Their clasped hands, it was a sigh of proximity, bone-deep exhaustion. She tugged on her husband's arm. It was the sound of a man who had been pulling him along as if contamination were possible, forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight without it. That night, the accumulated pressure finally found a crack. Why do you just let them? Clara burst out, pacing their living room. The guard, the agent, that horrible woman in the park. You just absorb it. We should fight back. And how do we do that, Clara? Ellie's voice was sharper than she'd ever heard it. Make a scene in the store. Sue the real estate agent for what? Not looking at me enough. Yell at an old lady in the park. What does that accomplish, other than making us the angry black man and his hysterical white girlfriend? This is the air I breathe. This is the world. I am tired of fighting. I just want to come home and have some peace. The words hung between them, raw and painful. Tears streamed down her face, tears of anger for the world and of shame for her own naivete. It wasn't an argument between them. It was their first joint battle against an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere all at once. He closed the distance between them, wrapping his arms around her. She buried her face in his chest, and they stood there for a long time, holding each other up. The bubble had been torn, and they were learning that the only way to patch it was with each other. Their home wasn't just a place with a roof and walls, it was a sanctuary they had to actively, consciously defend. The polished KJ Felina Vance's home was a warm, breathing testament to a life fully lived. The Sterling residence was a monument to wealth, a polished cage of beige and glass, driving through the iron gates of the Northwood community. Clara felt a familiar sense of detachment. She had grown up here, but it had never truly felt like home. Now, seeing it through Ellie's eyes, it felt like an alien planet. Her father, Richard Sterling, stood on the perfectly manicured lawn as they pulled into the circular driveway. He was handsome, tanned, and dressed in expensive casual wear that looked more like a costume than clothing. He smiled as they got out of the car, a politician's smile, wide, white, and utterly devoid of warmth. "There she is," he boomed. Kissing Clara's cheek before turning to Eli, he extended a hand, his grip firm. "A classic power play. And you must be Elias. A pleasure to finally meet you." "It's Eli, sir. And the pleasure is all mine," Eli said, his voice smooth as silk. Meeting her father's gaze without flinching, her mother, Sandra, fluttered out behind him, a bundle of nerves wrapped in cashmere. "Oh, hello, Eli. It's so wonderful to have you. Come in, come in. Don't stand out in the cold." The house was as Clara remembered, vast, silent, and intimidatingly clean. Art that was chosen for its investment value hung on the walls. It was the antithesis of the Vance home. There were no histories here, only transactions. Dinner was served at a long, formal dining table that could have seated 20. The meal was a quiet, tense affair, punctuated by the clinking of silverware on porcelain and Richard Sterling's carefully curated questions. He was a master of the microaggression, wielding it with the precision of a surgeon. "So, Eli," he began, dabbing his lips with a linen napkin. "Clara tells me you're an architect. That's fascinating. You must be very articulate to win over those zoning boards." Clara felt Eli stiffen beside her. The compliment was a poisoned dart, a backhanded expression of surprise that a black man could be well-spoken. Eli simply smiled politely. "It's more about the designs than the speeches, but being able to communicate a vision helps." Richard moved on, circling his prey. "And where did you grow up? Not around here?" "I'd wager." "No, sir. I grew up in the South End." The South End," Richard said, nodding slowly, as if this confirmed a theory. "Tough neighborhood. Heard they're trying to clean it up." "You've done very well for yourself. Getting out of there. Did you get into college on one of those scholarships?" The implication was as subtle as a punch to the gut. He wasn't just asking if Eli got a scholarship. He was asking if he got one because he was black. If he'd taken a spot from a more deserving candidate. Clara felt a hot, coiling anger in her stomach. She opened her mouth to protest, to say something, anything. But Ellie's hand found hers under the table, a gentle squeeze that said, "Let me handle this. I was fortunate to receive an academic scholarship based on my grades and portfolio," Eli said, his voice even, betraying no emotion. "I worked hard for it." Clara watched, her heart breaking. She saw the mask Eli wore, the one of infinite patience, the one he had to wear to navigate rooms like this, to deal with men like her father. She watched as her father continued his relentless, polite assault, questioning Ellie's background, his family, his ambitions, all under the guise of getting to know him. And she saw her mother, flitting around, topping up wine glasses, desperately trying to steer the conversation to safer topics like the weather. Her face a mask of strained cheerfulness. Her father wasn't just being ignorant. This wasn't a clumsy attempt to connect. It was a test, a trial by 1,000 cuts, designed to see if Eli would break, if he would show anger, if he would prove himself to be the stereotype Richard already held in his mind. He was trying to establish dominance, to put Eli in his place, to make it clear that he was, and always would be, an outsider. The dawning realization was a physical blow. This wasn't just her father being his usual, overbearing self. This was prejudice. This was ugly, insidious racism, wrapped in a linen napkin and served on fine china. And it was coming from her own family. The shame was so intense it felt like she couldn't breathe. The drive home was shrouded in a thick, heavy silence. The radio was off. The city lights streaked by the window, but Clara saw none of them. Her mind was a chaotic storm of rage, shame, and a profound, bottomless sorrow. She was shaking. "Eli, I am so sorry," she finally whispered, the words catching in her throat. I never saw it before. How he is. I'm so ashamed." Eli was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He reached Over, his hand finding hers in the darkness, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. He didn't say, "It's okay," he didn't say, "Don't worry about it." Because it wasn't okay. He just said, "I know." And in those two words, she heard everything. She heard his exhaustion, his pain, and his unwavering love for her despite it all. The cage of her childhood had been built on ugly foundations, and for the first time, she was seeing the bars, the shattering of a friendship to escape the lingering chill of the dinner with her father. Clara decided to host a game night. She needed to surround herself and Eli with warmth, with laughter, with their chosen family. She invited a few close friends, including Becca. Becca was not just a friend. She was a landmark in Clara's life. They had met in kindergarten, a bond forged over scraped knees and shared juice boxes. Their friendship was a 20-year-long conversation, a constant presence that Clara had always taken for granted. As stable and reliable as the ground beneath her feet, the evening started perfectly. The living room was filled with the easy camaraderie of old friends. Laughter echoed off the walls as they played a rowdy card game, the tension of the past weeks melting away. Under the warmth of wine and friendly competition, Eli was relaxed. His real, unguarded laugh a balm to Clara's soul. It happened during a lull in the game. Someone had turned on the news, where a story was running about a local protest. Becca, swirling the red wine in her glass, turned to Eli. "Okay, Eli, you gotta give me the real take on this," she said, her tone conspiratorial. "My coworker was saying that if these guys would just comply, none of this would happen. I mean, it's not that hard, right?" She finished it with a little laugh, as if she were sharing an innocent, slightly edgy observation. The air in the room didn't just cool, it froze. Every head turned toward Eli. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. A shudder simply came down over his face, the open warmth from moments before gone, replaced by a still, impenetrable mask. The light in his eyes vanished. "I wouldn't know," he said, his voice quiet and devoid of any emotion. He carefully placed his cards face down on the table. "Excuse me. I think I need some air." He stood up and walked out onto their small balcony, closing the glass door softly behind him. The party was over. The laughter had evaporated, replaced by a thick, awkward silence. Becca looked around, bewildered. "What?" she said, her voice a defensive whisper. "What did I say?" The other friends, mortified, quickly made their excuses and left soon. It was just Clara and Becca in the wreckage of the evening. "Becca, what you said," Clara started, her voice shaking with a controlled fury. "You can't say things like that, especially not to him." "What things?" Becca shot back, her face flushing. She was a cornered animal now, her confusion curdling into defiance. "It was a question. I was asking his opinion. God, ever since you started dating him, you're so sensitive. It's like you're walking on eggshells." The words hit Clara with the force of a slap. "You're so sensitive," the ultimate dismissal, the gaslighter's creed. Sensitive. Clara's voice dropped, becoming dangerously quiet. "He has to live with that opinion every day of his life, Becca. That isn't an abstract debate for him. It's his reality." "What you call the question was you asking him to justify his own community's pain while you sit there sipping Chardonnay. It wasn't a joke. It was poison." Becca stood up, grabbing her purse. "You know what? I can't do this. This isn't you. Clara, you've changed. I'm sorry I'm not woke enough for you now. It's not my fault you can't take a joke anymore." And there it was, the moment of perfect, horrifying clarity. The friendship Clara had believed was a bedrock of her life was, in fact, conditional. Becca was her friend as long as Clara's world remained small and comfortable, as long as it didn't challenge Becca's own lazy assumptions. The ground Clara had stood on for decades suddenly crumbled into dust. After Becca slammed the door behind her, Clara stood in the silent living room, the abandoned game looking like a relic from another lifetime. She walked to the balcony door. Eli was leaning on the railing, staring out at the city lights, his shoulders slumped out. The next day, after a sleepless night, Clara made the call. It was one of the hardest things she had ever done. The conversation was short, stilted, and full of painful, unspoken history. She told Becca that she couldn't have someone in her life who was so careless with her partner's humanity. Becca cried, then got angry, then hung up. It felt like an amputation. A part of her was gone, and the phantom limb ached when she told Eli what she'd done. He didn't say you didn't have to do that. He didn't say thank you. He just pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried for the friend she had lost and the innocence she could never get back. He knew she had made a sacrifice, a painful, necessary severing of her past to protect their future. In the quiet solidarity of his embrace, she felt the cost of her loyalty and the immense, unshakable value of it. The night the world stopped, Days after the fight with Becca were quiet, filled with a somber intimacy. They were orbiting each other, rebuilding their shared gravity. They needed a break, an escape into the simple anonymity of a dark movie theater. They chose a late showing of a mindless action film, and for 2 hours they sat in the dark, sharing popcorn, their shoulders pressed together, the world outside forgotten. It was after midnight when they were driving home. The streets were deserted, washed in the lonely orange glow of the streetlights. Eli was driving, humming softly along with the jazz station on the radio. Clara was leaning her head back, feeling a sense of peace settle over her for the first time in days. Then, the world exploded in the rearview mirror, a sudden, blinding flash of red and blue, painting the inside of the car in strobing, violent color. "What for?" Clara said, sitting bolt upright, her heart leaping into her throat. Eli didn't answer. His reaction was instantaneous and terrifyingly practiced. He immediately slowed the car, signaled, and pulled over to the curb, his movement smooth and deliberate. He killed the engine. He turned on the interior dome light. Then he placed both of his hands, palms open, on the top of the steering wheel. He was a different person. The relaxed man who was humming jazz seconds before was gone. In his place was a statue, perfectly still, his face a neutral mask. "Eli?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "Just stay quiet, Clara. Let me do the talking," he said. His voice low and unnaturally calm. A police officer appeared at the driver's side window, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, sweeping across Ellie's face, then hers, then the back seat. He was a thick, bull-necked man, and his other hand was resting, almost casually, on the butt of his holstered weapon. "License and registration," the officer said, his voice sharp and aggressive. "Of course, officer," Eli said. "I'm just going to reach into the glove compartment very slowly to get it for you." "I said license and registration, not a life story." Clara felt a cold dread seep into her bones. They hadn't been speeding. All their lights were working. There was no reason for this stop. The officer's hostility was naked, unprovoked. As Eli retrieved the documents with painstaking slowness, the officer's light stayed fixed on him. "You know why I pulled you over?" "No, sir, I do not." "You were drifting in your lane back there. Seemed a little unsteady." "Have you had anything to drink tonight?" "No, officer. We just came from the movies." The officer scrutinized the license. "Elias Vance. You live around here?" "Yes, sir." "About 10 minutes away. Get out of the car, Mr. Vance." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. "Why?" she asked, her voice coming out as a choke squeak. The officer's head snapped toward her, his eyes cold. "Ma'am, please stay out of it." "Sir, I said get out of the car." This was it. This was the moment she had read about, seen on the news, and feared in the abstract. But the abstract doesn't prepare you for the visceral, paralyzing terror of it becoming real. She saw the 1,000 ways this could go wrong, the split-second misunderstandings that could lead to tragedy. This wasn't about a broken taillight or drifting in a lane. This was about a black man in a nice car, late at night, in the wrong part of someone's imagination. The fear was so immense it threatened to swallow her. But then, something else rose up through it. It was the image of Lena Vance showing her the photo of a 7-year-old Eli with a bloody knee. It was the memory of her father's smug, cruel face. It was the ache of her lost friendship with Becca. It was a cold, hard, protective instinct that was stronger than her fear. Her hands shaking so badly she could barely control them, Clara pulled out her phone. Her thumb fumbled with the screen before finding the camera icon and hitting record. She angled it through the windshield, her voice coming out in a surprisingly steady tone. "Officer. For the record, my name is Clara Thompson. We are on the corner of Elm and 6th, and it is 12:38 a.m. I am recording this interaction." The officer froze, his head turning slowly back toward her. "I would like your name and your badge number, please," she continued, her voice gaining strength. The dynamic in the tense, blue and red-lit space shifted instantly. The officer's aggressive posture faltered. He looked from her phone back to Eli, who remained perfectly still, hands on the wheel. He was no longer just dealing with a black man alone in the dark. He was dealing with a witness, a white witness, with a recording. He sputtered for a moment, his face flushed. "This is a routine traffic stop, ma'am." "Then please tell me your name and badge number for my records," Clara repeated, her gaze unwavering. The officer stared at her for a long, charged moment. The power he had wielded so casually had been checked. He seemed to shrink before her eyes. Finally, he took a step back from the car door. "Look, I'm going to let you go with a warning this time," he bit out, his voice dripping with resentment. "Fix your taillight." He turned on his heel and strode back to his cruiser without another word. A moment later, the blinding lights were extinguished, and the police car sped off into the night. They sat in the profound, ringing silence. The only sound was the frantic beating of Clara's own heart. She was sobbing, deep, ragged gasps that shook her entire body. But it wasn't from relief. It was from the absolute, soul-shaking terror of what had just happened and what could have, so easily, happened instead. She looked at Eli. The mask of calm was gone, shattered. His hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white, and a fine tremor ran through his entire body. The strong, resilient man she loved looked fragile, haunted. All the walls were down. The world had come for them, and they had barely held it back. The house we built on a rock 10-minute drive home felt like an eternity. Neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with the unspoken terror of the traffic stop, a shared trauma that vibrated in the small space of the car. When they finally walked through their own front door, the familiar comfort of their apartment felt different. It was a sanctuary, yes, but they were acutely aware of how thin its walls were, how easily the world outside could breach them. Clara locked the door and leaned against it, her sobs finally subsiding into shuddering breaths. Eli stood in the center of the room, his back to her, his shoulders slumped. The hero of the action movie they just watched had faced down aliens and explosions, but his battles were fiction. Ellie's battle was real, and he fought it every single day. I was so scared, Clara whispered to his back. He turned around slowly, and for the first time, she saw the full depth of his exhaustion. It wasn't just in his eyes, it was in the weary set of his shoulders, the deep lines etched around his mouth. The mask was gone. I'm always scared, he said, his voice raw. Not for me, not anymore. I'm scared for you. I'm scared of what it cost you to love me. I'm scared of the day you realize it's too much. The raw vulnerability in his confession broke her heart and fortified her resolve in the same instant. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face into his chest. Don't you dare say that, she said fiercely into his shirt. What cost me is the world, Eli, not you. You are the only thing that makes sense in it. And she, now having felt the icy touch of that fear herself, could finally, truly understand. She hadn't just witnessed his reality, she had shared it. The last barrier of her naivete had been burned away in the flash of those red and blue lights. In the days that followed, a quiet resolution settled over them. They were shaken, but not broken. The experience had fused them together, forging their love into something stronger than steel. They realized they could not change the world's prejudice, but they could refuse to allow it to dictate the terms of their lives. They would define their own world. The first step was a letter. Clara sat down and wrote to her father. It was not a letter of anger or accusation. It was a letter of boundaries, calm and clear, and absolute. Dear Dad, she wrote, I love you, but I will not subject my husband, the man I love and respect more than anyone, to the kind of judgment and prejudice you showed him in your home. Your approval is not something we will seek any longer. Our world, Ellie's and mine, will be built on respect, kindness, and unconditional love. You are welcome to enter it, but you must leave your prejudice at the door. The choice is yours. She sent it without knowing if she would ever get a reply, and she found she didn't care. The final act of their quiet revolution took place 2 weeks later. It wasn't a formal dinner party, but a potluck on a Saturday afternoon. They didn't invite people out of obligation. They invited their true family. Lena Vance arrived first, carrying a massive dish of her famous mac and cheese. She didn't say anything about the letter or the events that prompted it, but she looked at Clara in a new way. The last vestiges of skepticism in her eyes were gone, replaced by a deep, quiet respect. She pulled Clara into a hug that felt like a welcome home. Other friends arrived, the ones who had left an embarrassed silence on game night and called the next day to apologize and check on them. A new couple they had met, also in an interracial relationship, came, bringing their 2 young children. The small apartment filled with a mosaic of faces, a symphony of different voices and easy laughter. Late in the afternoon, Clara stood with Eli on their small balcony, looking in through the glass door at the scene inside. Their home was overflowing, with life, with music, with the aroma of a dozen different dishes, with love. It was a world they had built together, piece by piece, out of shared struggle and defiant joy. They were not defined by a stranger's hateful stare, a father's cold judgment, or the flash of police lights in the dark. They were defined by this, by the sanctuary they had forged, the family they had chosen. Their house was built on a rock, and it was strong enough to withstand any storm. If you were moved by Clara and Allie's journey, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that touch the heart and challenge the mind. What part of their story resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below.